All right, let's get right into it. When we think about the California gold rush, our minds usually go straight to those romanticized images, right? Rugged prospectors, shiny nuggets gleaming in riverbeds, the whole Wild West aesthetic. But in this explainer, we're actually going to look way past that glittering facade. We're uncovering the harsh, on-the-ground realities hidden beneath the mythology, the profound, permanent impacts on both the landscape and the people who were already living there. Because the big question we really need to ask ourselves before we get totally blinded by all that wealth is, what was the unseen toll of this era? I mean, humanity has always chased fortune, but the gold rush, it's honestly one of the most stark examples in history of crossing a major line in the pursuit of progress.
Act 1, The Golden Magnet. Let's start by looking at the absolutely astonishing, literal overnight transformation of a sleepy coastal hamlet into a completely chaotic metropolis.
San Francisco's leap from a tiny trading post to a massive city is frankly pure insanity. Back in 1835, Yerba Buena was barely a blip on the map. But then came the U.S. conquest in 46, a strategic renaming to San Francisco in 47, and boom, the 1848 gold discovery turned the place into an absolute magnet. By 1849, the population exploded to 25,000. We're talking 1,000 immigrants arriving by sea every single week. The growth was so frantic, merchants just built wharves right out into the harbor and dumped so much waste they actually buried the original cove entirely under landfill. Crazy, right?
And this massive influx wasn't just domestic. The promise of endless wealth acted as a global beacon. It really pulled in Chinese immigrants who were desperately seeking new possibilities. Back in China, they were facing high taxes after the Opium Wars, compounded by years of just devastating floods and droughts. So when merchant vessels showed up with news of Gamsan or Gold Mountain, thousands of largely illiterate but incredibly hopeful men sailed across the entire Pacific to California.
Now, in this chaotic new world, power dynamics shifted in wildly unexpected ways. Take this intense 1852 rivalry between two Chinese immigrants. On one side, you have Yi Tai. He was a notorious community boss within the Shejup Association, ruling with an iron fist, even reportedly chaining up people who defied him. But he met his match in a renowned madam named Miss Toy. She actually outsmarted him by threatening to take him to court for extortion. She leaned heavily on American laws in a way she never could have back in China. It's just a fascinating snapshot of a society being built and tested in real time. Meanwhile, out in the gold fields, the reality for the average miner was a study in extremes. Sure, Saturday night might mean a temporary escape, maybe at a gambling table or, in a bottle of whiskey. But Sunday morning, that brought a sobering, brutal hangover of harsh chores, terrible food, illness, and just deep, extreme loneliness for the families they left behind. Act 2. The machinery of destruction. So, let's pivot to the environmental cost and see exactly how this desperate greed fueled the invention of some devastating new technologies. Because once the easy-to-reach surface gold was gone, miners had to innovate. And wow, were those innovations brutal on the California landscape. Hydraulic mining rapidly leveled up from crude canvas hoses in 1853 to massive, high-pressure water cannons engineered by Anthony Chabot just a couple years later. By the 1870s, these monitors were up to 18 feet long, blasting a stream of water 500 feet into the air. One reporter even noted this stream could effortlessly unroof and completely demolish a wooden building. They were literally blasting away entire mountainsides to get to the ancient gold-bearing gravel underneath. But this brute force method created a permanent environmental scar known as slickens. And let me be clear, this wasn't just harmless dirt. It was a highly toxic slurry of soil, rock, and massive amounts of mercury, a heavy neurotoxin they used to extract the gold. This toxic debris completely choked California's rivers. It ruined downstream agricultural lands, decimated fish populations, and caused devastating floods in communities like Sacramento and Marysville. 685 million. That is the staggering number of cubic yards of debris dumped into the Yuba River alone. To put that massive number into perspective, that is enough toxic sediment to bury the entire island of Manhattan under 10 feet of waste. Just let that sink in for a second. Act 3. The true human cost. We now have to pivot to the darkest chapter of this era, the devastating erasure of California's indigenous populations. Before the prospectors arrived, tribes had lived sustainably on these lands for thousands of years. But the scale of the population collapse that followed is absolutely chilling. In 1769, an estimated 310,000 native people lived within modern-day California. By 1913,
only 17,000 remained. This was not just a byproduct of passive expansion. It was the direct result of disease, slavery, and a horrific, legalized genocide, fueled by gold-driven opportunists and fully sanctioned by federal policies. Tribes like the Miwok, Maidu, Nisenan, and Winton suffered massive death from mining violence. Their ancestral lands were outright seized by prospectors. Treaties were hastily negotiated by the government and then just as hastily broken. Indigenous people were forcibly removed and relocated onto federally created rancherias, basically barren lands where farming was nearly impossible. This forced communities that had thrived independently for millennia into complete dependence on the U.S. government just to survive.
Act 4. Boomtowns to ghost towns. Because eventually, the machinery stopped, the veins dried up, and the prospectors packed up and left.
What they left behind were eerie, abandoned settlements scattered all across the state. The inevitable bust transformed these once thriving hubs into the ghost towns that now pepper the Mojave Desert and Sierra Nevada. Silver City was abandoned as soon as the gold veins went dry. Darwin saw a slow, painful decline in silver mining. Amboy faded out when Route 66 bypassed the town. And places like Garlock, that ore processing hub, just shut its doors in 1903. In a matter of decades, communities of thousands were reduced to absolute silence.
Today, places like Bauri exist in this really fascinating state called arrested decay. Basically, it means preserving a site exactly as it was when it was abandoned, with no active restoration. When the State Parks Authority took over in the 1960s, they didn't fix up the 100-plus buildings, which even included a morgue. They just stopped them from falling down any further. It leaves behind this skin-tingling, frozen-in-time snapshot of what life and sudden departure looked like during the gold rush. Act 5, California's enduring legacy. But, this story doesn't just end in the past. History isn't just something that happened back then. It's the foundation we're walking on right now. Because that arrested decay, it isn't just for buildings. The toxic legacy of mercury and sediment from the 19th century is still very much trapped in reservoirs and ecosystems today. A 2022 UC Davis study actually found elevated levels of mercury in local wildlife right now. Even worse, around 26 million cubic yards of that toxic mining sediment are still sitting in reservoirs. And as our climate changes and extreme weather ramps up, there's a very real risk this debris could be unleashed, bringing back the threat of downstream flooding all over again. Yet, against all odds, the human story here is one of incredible endurance. Indigenous peoples survived those atrocities. Starting in the late 20th century, they reorganized their tribal governments, fought back against federal termination policies, and really began reclaiming their sovereignty. We see this with nations like the Wilton Rancheria and the Yochadehe Winton Nation, who successfully fought to restore their federal recognition and secure their trust lands. Through tremendous resilience, these tribes utilized tools like the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act to build ventures like the Kashish Creek Casino Resort. And this is huge because utilizing that gaming revenue allowed them to achieve true economic independence. It gave them the resources to restore traditional homelands, fund community education, and secure stability for the future. In 2009, the Rumsey Band of Winton Indians even changed their federally labeled name back to the Yochadehe Winton Nation in their ancestral Patwin language, which is just a powerful mark of pride and hope. So as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a pretty heavy, lingering thought. The prospectors abandoned their towns, sure, but when will the land actually recover from their legacy? The humans who caused the destruction might have moved on, leaving their ghost towns to bake in the desert sun, but we are left to wonder just how long the physical and environmental scars of that greed will endure. The gold rush absolutely built modern California, but that progress came with a massive tab. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and remember, always keep questioning the history you think you know.